Well, welcome to everybody. We had about 40 people on the call earlier today, and we've got about 11 on the call tonight. So thank you very much for taking the time to come and listen to this statistics workshop.
So my name is Don Kramer. I attend Milwaukee Central. I am a volunteer for the conference, so I'm not in Sun Prairie. This is something that I do on my side, on the side, in the nights and the evenings and on weekends. So my contact information, note that it's not a Wisconsin UMC email, it's a Gmail account that we've set up for this. I can answer questions that you send in. Also, the office staff in Sun Prairie is also very good at answering questions. They're the ones that are often using the data. So Sarah and Lisa Adler, they're all very good at, if there's login questions or just questions about like what lines things should be entered on, all of us are pretty much figuring it out, oftentimes as things are happening too. Today, I'm definitely thinking about this as very much like a workshop. Hopefully answering questions that you guys have, not just presenting things to you. Oftentimes churches have similar questions, so if you raise any questions, there's a good chance that other people on this call will also have similar questions. Feel free to interrupt me as things are going, or put a question to the chat. I'm hoping that Sarah will be able to see the chat. My screen is currently being shared, so I can't really see what's happening with the chat. All right. So we've got a couple objectives today. Once we want to convince you that entering the data is important, that there's some bigger purposes here and some bigger decisions are based on what individual churches are entering. We also want to help you with the Ezra system, that's the data collection system, and just get some comfort being in that system. And also we're hoping to talk about some common mistakes and questions that people have. Also talk about like some best practices, some things that you can do earlier on to make things easier for next year. All right, so first, so the timeline that we look at, this is all based on the prior year. So we'll talk about the 2020 statistics is all happening in 2021. So in January, we set up Ezra, we make it available so that people can start entering in their data. We suggest that first step is for you to log in, make sure that you can log in, and then there's a way to print out blank forms, and I'm going to show you how to do that. And usually people, a lot of people, what they do is they get those blank forms, they start filling them in, and once they have those forms ready to go, that's when they log back in and enter the information into the system. So that's a pretty good thing to be doing in January, and then the deadline for you to enter your data will be the end of February. So we're looking for individual churches to have their church information entered into Ezra by the end of February. Then during March and April, I go through the data and look for warnings and errors. There's a lot of follow-up questions that I'll send to churches to say, like, did you really mean to enter this data in the way you did? That's a big change from last year. And just running some analysis to see how much things have changed, if it looks reasonable or not. At the end of April, that's when I have to submit all of Wisconsin's data to General Conference. They look at it, and then sometime in the summer, they come back to us with questions, and they'll ask us to check for specific things. And some of it has to do with like new churches and closing churches, but then they also look for some big changes and ask us to follow up to make sure that the data is correct, right? And usually that's an opportunity that if they're opening up the data again, that I can make some updates in case churches come back to us and say, hey, we found out we made a mistake, and can you update something? So that's in general what our timeline looks like. It used to be that I submitted the data at the end of June. They keep moving my due date earlier and earlier. So it used to be that I would have about 4 or 5 months to go through the data. And really, it's not even so much analysis, but talking to individual churches and getting them after getting their data entered. So I really do appreciate those of you that are already in January thinking about this now. It makes my job a lot easier in March and April doing all the follow-up questions. The purpose of the data collection, overall, there's things that happen at at the Wisconsin conference level, and then there's bigger things that happen at the general conference level. But overall, we're looking to analyze trends, and we're looking to allocate resources within the denomination. So just some idea of some of the trends we look at. Membership for Wisconsin is currently at 54,000. That was at the end of 2019. It was a 4% decrease from the prior year. Overall, we've been looking at decreases in Wisconsin from like between 4 and 5% every year, looking back maybe at least 10 years. You can see that it's decreasing about the same, significant 4 or 5% every year. Looking at assets, how much property value we have, how much liquid assets are in the bank. Those are all different lines in Ezra. You'll notice that our property value went down 0.1% in 2019. So it's sort of interesting to think we keep losing members, but our properties keep staying the same. So those are the types of trends that we're looking at. On the income side, for example, I find it interesting that the rent income that churches are taking in keeps increasing. That it seems like a lot of churches are renting out their buildings to help pay some of their bills. So those are just some examples of some different trends that we're looking at and why the data is important. Also allocating resources. Sarah and the office in Sun Prairie, they're basing the apportionments based on the data that's inputted into Ezra. And so we're going to talk about specifically which lines affects the apportionment calculations. Also just looking at clergy assignments. As we're going into our next quadrennium, there's talk about, how will bishops be moved around? And a lot of it comes down to, the counts of people in Wisconsin in our conference versus other conferences. And they do look at those numbers, and all of those numbers are based on each individual church's input into Ezra. So all of these individual churches, they do get combined together and looked into at a much larger level. So for example, if you go online, I got this as, these are the counts for members in our jurisdiction, in the North Central jurisdiction, and you can see Wisconsin at the bottom there. I think this was 2018, the latest information on from General Conference, 56,000 members in Wisconsin. So you can see compared to other conferences in our jurisdiction, how we stack up to them in size. We're one of the smaller ones. Minnesota and the Dakotas, they're also small, but they're currently share a lot of resources together, such as sharing a bishop, right? So that's just some example of why the data analysis is important, that it is sort of coming together so for some bigger decisions that are made at much higher levels than ours. At a more local level within the state, the apportionment calculations are based on different levels or different lines in the Ezra system. So the apportionment calculation uses membership values, and those are usually lines 1 through 4. And then we also look at the expenses. And so the expenses are broken down. Lines 39 through 45 deal with compensation for staff and their benefits. So there's lines there for clergy benefits, clergy compensation, but then also non-clergy compensation and benefits. Also, the program expenses are all put together into line 46, and overall operating expenses are all based on line 47. So those are the lines that the Sun Prairie office is using when they're doing their apportionment calculations, right? So I don't want to say those are the, could we say they're the most important lines that we want to make sure are accurate?
Yes.
Okay. Everything's important, but these are more important, right? All right. So overall, the Ezra system, I hope most of you are familiar with this already. The website, ezra.gcfa.org. When you log in, you want to use your 6-digit GCNO. And then I reset the passwords at the beginning of this year so that they're all stats 2020, right? And so you can change the password. I think it might prompt you to change the password, but I don't think of it as a big security issue that people are breaking into Ezra and entering information for other people. But if you do have multiple people at your church that are entering information in, just make sure that you're sharing it, all right? So one of the first things you should do when you log in, though, is change your contact information. So when you log in, my screen might look different than yours, but you should be able to see that account drop-down menu, and you want to change your contact information, especially if you've got pastors that are changing in your church or who's ever entering your data in your church. Definitely change that contact information, because if we have questions, that's what I'm looking at to see who's the person to contact about any data that was entered. And so if you don't update that, sometimes I end up contacting the past pastor that was assigned to the church. Right away, I would also suggest producing the blank church input form. So underneath reports, I don't know if everyone else has the same reports that they're allowed to print out, but one of the options that all individual users should see the blank church input form. And so then when you see that, the nice thing about it is it prints last year's information in one column, and then there's lines there for you to print this year's information, right? So you can sort of see what happened last year and make sure that it's, you can see if there are significant changes when it's laid out there so nicely. All right, so let's talk about the 3 different tables. Table 1 all deals with membership and participation in your ministries. Table 2 deals with your assets and what expenses you've paid out from the prior year. And then table 3 is church income. And I'm going to log into Ezra right now and just sort of talk about each table. So I'm going to stop sharing this. And instead, I'm going to...
And I'm going to add something in here. We've had a couple of people who, from the slide where he said use GCNO number, have actually typed GCNO number. That's not what you type. It's your 6-digit church number. And then a consistent password is stats 2020.
Yeah.
So you need to use your specific church number. And it should be on the top right-hand side of your apportionment statement or any other things that you use. We've had a couple people try that. I mean.
Yep. Yeah, yeah. You should have your own unique 6-digit number. And that's the way we keep it consistent, so that when people are changing roles in their churches, that, you know, it's always the same login information. So no matter who it is year to year, that they'll be able to log in. When I log in, then to actually enter my stats, you know, so after I've already printed out the blank forms, I've entered those in on paper, which ones, the information I've gathered it, then I go to my enter stats. And from here, there's 3 different tables, right? So, as I was saying before, lines 1 through 4 are the ones that apportionments are based on. These are oftentimes, you know, these are pretty important to know actually what happened with your membership in the past year, all right? Right off the bat, that first line is going to be based on prior year's number, all right? So you cannot change this. So in my line 1, that's 60, I can't make any changes from the end of last year, line 4, right? And then as you go through this, breakdown of race of your members. And then let's see, line 6, this is the gender breakdown of your membership. And it's important to notice that several of these lines are orange, and part of that has to deal with errors and warnings, but the ones that are orange, they should be equal to each other. The total members should be the same as the total breakdown of race and the total breakdown of gender. So there will be warnings and or errors if they don't match up, right? So that's definitely something you want to check as you're entering those numbers in. 7, average attendance at weekly worship services. I find this, when I'm analyzing the data, I find this to be very important. Membership, I think we all know, doesn't necessarily translate to exactly who's being active in your church, but looking at average weekly worship services is something we do look at. You know what, Sarah, we didn't really talk about this the other day. The difference in 2020 with average weekly worship service and number of persons who worship online. I think we should try to give a consistent, how are people going to answer this consistently? I would say, go ahead.
I was going to say, this is one of the hardest questions, I think, and we know up front that the information that we get here is going to be very hard. for many churches who are using Facebook or a Zoom or something like that, it's going to be hard to know who's on there. What my church has done is to come up with an email address. And then every Sunday during the service, they said, please send an email to let us know that you attended. And all I do is in the subject line say, Rich and Sarah Snyder were here. And somebody was pretty creative in setting it up, because I get a response from John Wesley thanking me for attending, glad that I could be with. And if I have any concerns or cares, it gives the church email address and phone number. So that's one way you can do it, to try to keep track of the people who are online.
So if someone, so like my church has 30 people attending online, I'm assuming I'll put 0 in for average attendance at weekly service, but put all 30 on 7A.
Correct.
Okay, so we're not double counting there. They're either in person on line 7 or they're online in 7A. All right, a lot of these others are pretty self-explanatory, number of baptisms, things like that. Constituents of the church is also something very interesting that people interpret differently, but we don't look at it very often. But the idea here is people that are associated with your church, but they're not actually members. You know, we have a man that attends our service every week. He's Catholic, but his wife is Methodist. So he'd be one of those people that's sort of like another constituent of the church, but isn't actually a member, right?
Just had the question, Don, about what if they find out that the number that's at the end of last year is wrong, and it looks like they can go on to line 2D or 3C if there's a removed or added by correction?
Yeah, exactly. That's where you want to do that, the removed by correction, 3C, and the other one added by correction, 2D.
So number 1 has to be the same number that was on the end of last year?
Exactly, yeah. And like, even if you emailed me and asked me to make a change, I don't have the power to do that. Like, the books are closed from last year and we can't go back and change those.
Okay, thank you.
Something that we look just at trends, just the number of participants in different groups. And so Christian formation groups versus, let's see, they've got Sunday school down here, 13, vacation Bible school at 14, and sort of, I don't know if I'm necessarily even allowed to say this, but I feel like different churches interpret this differently. And I think one of the things you want to do is you just want to make sure you're consistent in your church, all right? But you also don't want to double count things. Don't consider Vacation Bible School as one of your Christian formation groups. One of the guiding rules you should be following is don't double count, all right? If something's being accounted for somewhere, don't also account for it somewhere else on that same sheet, all right? All right, I don't have anything else to point out on this page. Most of it's pretty self-explanatory, all right? And a lot of it comes down to like participants in different types of ministries. You sort of have to think about how your church is defining some of those ministries, right? All right. And if anyone does have any questions, we can also come back to this. Table 2. Let's see, church assets and expenses. First, I do feel like I get a lot of questions about line 24. And Sarah, you know what? I forget about this. How are they supposed to get the value? I feel like, are they supposed to use what their insurance values the building at? Is that the, I feel like every time I have to look this up every year.
That's the number that I typically recommend, because most churches don't go out and get a new appraisal or a new assessment, or they don't have any kind of assessment from the city because they're property tax exempt.
Yeah.
So if you have Church Mutual come out every couple of years, or I want to say anywhere from 4 to 5, they'll come out and do an evaluation so that you're properly covered for insurance. And that's a reasonable value to use for line 24.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, so I feel like I get a lot of questions on line 24. And then let's see, something we also want to talk about is, you'll notice lines 28 through 36 are all missing here, because those are lines that deal with the amount of money you give to the conference through apportionments, through special Sundays, and they already have that in Ezra. That's already been entered. So we don't need you to enter that yourselves. Sarah does like a data transfer, and it just goes through based on what you actually did give to the conference. right?
Exactly. So everything that you have either sent in electronically or sent in by check is, and that shows up on your apportionment statement, we upload into Ezra so that we have that correct information.
Right. But that's why there are lines there for 37, 38, monies that you gave that you didn't tell the conference about already. So 37 is specifically for United Methodist Causes. You raised money for UMCOR and you just sent the check directly to them, put that on line 37. But if there's other benevolent causes that you're giving money to, you'd put that on line 38, okay? So then we start, or line 39 is what gets into those pretty important lines that help determine apportionment calculations. So that's where you start dealing with the different values or the compensation to staff. It's broken down by clergy and then the non-clergy staff also. Compensation versus benefits also. Lines 46 and 47. 46 is local church program expenses and 47 is operating expenses. And this is something that you really want to capture sort of what's typical in your church. If you have a major expense, you're fixing the roof, you're replacing the furnace. This is something that's not necessarily to be placed on 45 and 46, right? So, or sorry, 46 and 47. So 49 is what captures, those big major repairs that are happening in a given year that aren't necessarily those typical events, right? Because really what we're trying to capture in 46 and 47 is what is your church paying on a typical year, so that we can compare that to other churches in a typical year, so that when we're calculating the apportionments, that it's actually portioned out fairly, all right? Sarah, am I sort of capturing that?
Yes.
Accurately?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Cool. All right. I don't have anything else to say about table 2.
Thank you.
There are some specific things that I have on other slides, some common questions. So I do think there's going to be some things that I come back to based on these tables. Sorry, Sarah, I'm sorry, I cut you off a little.
Oh, that's exactly it. You cover some of the things in a later slide.
Yeah. All right, and then table 3 is church income.
Oh, wait a minute. Someone did bring up the point that there is a little bit of an explanation, right? If you click on the question to the right, does that give you more information?
Sure. So let's see. Well, the whole question usually has a pretty good explanation. Let's see.
About the same. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, there's actually extra information there. So yeah, that's helpful too. All right, and then table 3 is income. All right, number of giving units. I find that pretty telling sometimes with churches, as opposed to the number of members, like how many, but then giving units, is that really a family? It's sort of church by church how it gets interpreted. However, 52, this is something that it's really helpful if you have your own accounting system sort of set up for this. So 52A is based on the amounts of money you receive based on pledges. 52B based on givers that you know who they are but didn't necessarily pledge ahead of time. And then 52C is the amount from unidentified givers. So just the loose change, the loose bills in the collection plates that you're not really sure who they came from. So I know on our, at our church, every week, our system, we sort of break it down based on those 3 categories, knowing that at the end of the year, we're going to be asked this. So that's something that is really helpful if you can get that set up during your year instead of waiting until January to try to figure out what happened in the prior year. All right. Let's see. So let's see, D and E are pretty self-explanatory. F, this is where I was mentioning the other day, like it's sort of interesting to see over the past couple of years how 52F has been increasing. People that are using church buildings on non-Sundays and just that extra income that's coming in. And then 52G, fundraisers and other sources. It's important when you enter this, you sort of want to enter just what you net received. If you're having a pancake breakfast, you know, how much money did you take in minus how much money did you pay for all the pancake batter ahead of time. So you sort of want to just include your net proceeds from that fundraiser. Right. Lines 53 are all based on special projects. Let's see. And I do sort of have a slide later on talking about this, so I'm going to come back to that. And then 54 is sort of all these weird scenarios, different grants that come out. It says institutional sources outside the local church. These are all definitely special scenarios that you should sort of already know about at your church. This year with the PPP, I want to talk about that a little bit later, but other grants and financial sources, financial support, if you do receive money from the Payment Protection Plan program, 54C, this is where you'd end up putting that money, right? And again, I've got another slide with that sort of broken down, so I'm going to come back to that conversation later, all right? Any questions about the actual like logging into Ezra or the different tables, or sort of just like the setup of what this looks like?
I have a question.
Yeah, Luann.
Okay, now in this report, do you just want 2020 information? For example, our church always has a harvest dinner, but we didn't have it this year because of COVID, etc.
Yep.
So do you still want that information?
Yeah, we just want what happened in 2020.
Okay.
I think we all, I think we're expecting the numbers for 2020 are going to be bonkers. Like,
Yeah.
I think there's going to be a lot of, well, let's see how different this is than 2019, and yeah. You know.
Okay. So, and then back to like typical events as far as programming, a lot of our programming didn't happen.
Yes.
So again, you only want what happened in 2020?
We only want what happens in 2020. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. No, I'm glad you clarified that.
We are expecting things to be a little odd. We know that probably operating expenses in churches will go down if you haven't been open and you haven't had the heat up and you haven't had the water and all of that.
Yes.
That might go down. So we know that all of that's going to change. Your statistics are always based upon how you compare to everybody else in the conference. So if everybody changed in the conference, you may stay as the same percentage of total expenses, but we'll see how that plays out. We know that there's going to be some big differences. I'm making note of many of the questions that are coming through the chat screen because I know that he's got a slide about this, about some of these later, but I'll make sure that we hit them all. While we're on here though, can you talk about those warning signs over on the right? So if something is green or orange or yellow or.
Yeah. So when you start entering these, if you've got a change, so let's see. This is my church, so I'm going to mess up with it a little. All right, so for one thing, after you enter the information, there's 2 steps. You have to save the data and then you have to submit it. So just saving it's not enough, because a lot of times what will happen is people will go in there, enter information, and they'll save it, but they know they still have to wait for one more piece of data. So I don't know that you're done with it until you've submitted it. So once you enter something in, so number of giving units, you know, if I put in 15 here and I save it, I should get some errors. Yep. So up here I get some warnings, and so for one thing, like on line 51, last year it was 0, this year it's 15, and so it's very helpful to us if you enter an explanation for it. And sometimes the explanation can just be, it's a correction. We know that we made a mistake last year, or something like that. We sold a building, or due to COVID, we weren't meeting. Anything that, there's different warnings that are set based on this year is 0, but last year was not, or vice versa, or if there's a certain percentage threshold change from year to year. So there's different warnings. Yellow, if it's a warning, you can still submit it, but it will ask you to explain why it's so significantly different. If it's a red, if it's an error, then you have to go back and make a change. So for example, some errors are, your total members based on race is not the same as your total members based on gender. So then you have to go back and make sure that it does balance, right? At the bottom of this page, if you start entering total values, actually because they're tan, you shouldn't be able to make changes there. But if somehow you are and it doesn't total, that's going to become a red warning or a red error, okay? Warnings you can still submit, you just have to explain them. Errors, though, you have to go make a change to them, right?
While we're looking at the detail on this page, I've had the question from someone about New Way grants. I'm not familiar with what a New Way grant is. Mary Beth, where does that come from?
It came from the United Methodist Foundation.
Okay, was
Yeah.
that for the, like the, sorry, for the, many churches got the $1,000 grant for
Yes.
helping with technology?
Yes, and then another 500 many of us received also.
Okay, I was gonna say that looks like, salary support from annual conference funds beyond, I think it looks like it's a 54B or C. Because that talks about connectional funds received. And so connectional, I'm thinking of any other United Methodist organization that gave the funding. So I'm gonna say 54B would be where you would put the grant from Wisconsin United Methodist Foundation.
Thank you.
Sarah, anything else?
Were you going to cover the question we got yesterday about pledged versus non-pledged versus loose plate?
I just talked about it a little bit, just based on how to, I would suggest trying to set that up in your weekly giving accounting. Anything more that I should say about that, though?
Nope, I think someone else asked that question about 52B. Does that does the non-pledged need to be a member? And it does not. So the way that I did it at my church, we had pledged income, non-pledged income, and then loose. And the non-pledged income would be money that came from anybody that had not pledged, but you know who they are. You can put a name to the donation. And then you have the amount received from unidentified givers would be loose plate or an anonymous donation. So I think 52A, B, and C are all very good things to have separated in your financial statements to show how much you rely on pledged income, how much comes in that's not pledged, but they kind of give it on a regular year. And then the other one would be kind of the other part that comes in.
And even that, pledges don't have to necessarily come from members either, so.
Right.
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna go back to the presentation.
We have a question about membership, because during Charge Conference this year, we didn't remove anybody because we were told because of COVID, we weren't going to remove anybody from the membership rolls. But we've had people die, and that still wasn't on our agenda for Charge Conference. And so what do we do on the statistical reports then? Can we still report that people died?
Certainly. I think that we want to be kind and during this time not take people off because they're not attending. But I think certainly if you have members who die, it's appropriate to take them off this year.
Okay. All
But
right.
I think her question, though, is they might not be moved actually from officially the books, that because
Right.
it actually happened during Charge Conference.
That's correct.
I mean, yeah, I would say do it on the stats report, but somehow take note that next year's Charge Conference, you're going to make sure to have them off the, have them on part of the Charge Conference agenda.
Yeah, and I'm not sure about the technicality about that. Certainly before you remove members because they didn't attend or because of something else, you want to have a Charge Conference approve it. But if someone dies, they're off your membership rolls. It's really whether you approve it or not. And so I think that makes sense to take them off.
Okay. All right, thank you.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Getting back to membership attendance, we had videos that we put out for devotional messages and we share with Belleville, but I don't have any way of knowing how many people watched that or anything. So I have no idea what I need to put in for attendance for a service.
Right. I think that's someone threw out the question about what about other things. And so I think that GCFA has missed an opportunity here for, we have a whole lot more of options other than people sitting in the pew and people being online. It sounds like people have gotten very creative about sending out CDs or sending out things in mail, or they're able to watch that. So I think that given that we don't have any other options, I would put, if you are able to track any of that because you're sending out a CD, you can count that as attending and put it in the worship online. I think we kind of make that worship online 7B or the 7A everything else.
Okay.
And a lot of it comes down to make your best educated guess, right?
Okay.
I mean, because even looking at like the number of views, you can't trust that because that could be people viewing it several times. Or I know I stop it and start it again. Did that count as 2 views? And yeah.
Yep.
There seems to be some question about whether those gifts from, or the foundation grants would be under 54B or C. So let Don and I check on that and I will get something out to you guys to confirm.
Cool. So just based on some of the things I've already talked about, I have a slide here just for some of the best practices. Just repeating that again, printing out a blank form ahead of time to gather your information, saving your tables as you're working through it. Check your totals that membership line 4 equals line 5 equals line 6. There's some other totals there, 52T, 53T, 54T. They equal all of those individual lines, 52A, B, C, D, E, F. They have to add up at 52T. I have save it there again because I guess I really care about saving. You have to change any errors, so that's anything that turns up red. You have to comment any warnings, so that's something that turns up yellow. And again, after you've done all this, then you can submit it. Make sure submitting's your last step, right? All right, next I want to talk about some common questions that come up. Common scenario is when there's a charge with multiple churches in it, and especially when one church is giving money to another church and then that church is paying all the bills or paying the pastor, and how do we account for that? The big rule there is make sure that you only record a number once in Ezra, right? So for example, you've got 2 churches, First UMC and Wesley UMC, they share a pastor. Let's say First UMC pays Wesley $10,000, and then Wesley writes out the checks that total $25,000 to the pastor, right? When they're filling out the compensation, First Church has paid $10,000, Wesley has paid $15,000, all right? And Wesley's not including that $10,000 that they received from First as income anywhere. They're sort of just a pass through. So you want to be really careful about that, because that $10,000 was income at First Church and they're paying it out to the pastor, even though it's passing through Wesley's church, Wesley does not include that $10,000 in their income because it was already recorded as income for First. And Wesley does not include that as an expense from Wesley because First already included that as an expense at First, right? That's a pretty simple situation with multiple churches in one charge. Does anyone have any more complicated scenarios? Because I know we get some pretty complicated ones in the conference.
So just in case anybody has any questions about that from an accounting perspective. So when First records it on their books, it's an expense. It's a pastor compensation expense, even though they're paying it to Wesley. And then when First gets the money, they can record, when Wesley receives the $10,000, they can record it as an offset to the expense, or they can record it as a receivable, depending upon how you record the compensation. This is probably one of the most common problems that we see, and then churches call me to find out why theirs went up so much and the other church that they share 50-50 is down. And that's because one church recorded all the expense and the other one didn't record any. So you have to make sure that however you split the compensation, you report that part on your specific statistic report.
All right. All right, another common question is, there's a big repair that happens at your church. Also, if like insurance starts getting involved, how does that all get reported? So the big idea here is that we really want to capture a typical year's expenses, 39 through 47. Those major projects, those major capital expenses get reported in line 49, right? So for example, if you've got regular maintenance on your furnace every year, my church every year there's furnace repairs. That's pretty typical. That's going on line 47. However, if there's a major thing of replacing the furnace, we'd end up putting that on line 49.
Someone asked about the parsonage expenses, and those would be treated the same way, correct, Don? So if they had to do normal upkeep of the parsonage, that goes on line 47, but if a major update would be on line 49.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. Another example, this based more on insurance. So you have to replace your roof for $15,000. The insurance, is paying out $12,000. That $12,000, Sarah, there's no income of $12,000 anywhere on the sheet.
No, it should offset the expense.
Okay. So then it would be just $3,000 is what you're paying to replace the roof, and that would go on line 49.
Because that's an unusual item there that happened.
Yeah.
This is one where one church's apportionment went way up, and luckily over in the comments for line 49, they explained to me that a tree fell on the roof and this was the amount that it cost. And so I didn't need to contact them because they provided the explanation in the box there.
Yeah, those explanations are very helpful. I think that's a new thing from maybe 5 years ago. And I feel like a lot of the communication I've had to do with local churches has gone down considerably because of it. Explanations are great. All right. Next, all right, so another issue that comes up is donations to other organizations or specific projects. So we had a question about like a garden that a church is running. And so sort of the two questions or the two ways I think about this, is the project or is that organization actually a part of your ministry? And is it part of your normal operating costs? Or is the project separate from your organization and you're almost just, I don't want to say passing money through, but it's sort of a different organization. So if the project, if you consider it part of your church's ministry and part of your operating costs, then the giving that's given for that, even if it's earmarked for something specific, you'd put that through 52A through C, based on whether they're known givers or loose change, stuff like that. And then your expenses, based on whether it's a programming expense or an operating expense, you'd be putting it on line 46 or 47. But then if the project is separate from your organization, right, you're collecting money and then giving it to another organization, then you still have to think about, is that giving part of your budget or is the giving part of a special collection? So like, for example, our church, we're members of Micah. So part of our budget is knowing that we're giving money to Micah every year. So that's not coming from a special donation. It's just part of our budget. So that money that comes in for that is going to be received in a typical spot on line 52A through C. However, if we just had a special Sunday that we said all the money given that week is passing through to Micah, then we would say that's on line 53D. And then finally, because that's a benevolence that we are passing those monies on to another organization, it's either going to be on line 37 if it's a Methodist organization, or line 38 if it's a non-Methodist organization. Some of this can get pretty sticky. I know my church, we've got gardens behind the church, and other churches and other actually non-churches, there's a whole organization based on that garden. And sometimes we're collecting money so that they can buy tools specifically for the garden. And sometimes we're paying stuff from our church to help the garden. And sometimes it can get really sticky there with when we consider that garden ours, and when we consider that garden sort of a community garden with multiple people, multiple organizations there. And so that's how we think about it. When is it part of our ministry, and when is it a separate organization?
You explained that so well, there's no questions yet.
Or I talk around it so much I confuse them. All right, probably the big question for this year that keeps coming up: how are we dealing with the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program? So the big idea here is, if you've received this loan and it's still outstanding, this is going to be reported as other debt. And that's on the assets side on line 27. However, if the loan has been forgiven, you want to report it as an other grant and financial support, and that's on line 54C. If your PPP paid for a specific expense, that doesn't get netted out. It's still one of your expenses. So just because they paid for someone's employment, don't say that you didn't actually have that employee. That's still an expense that happened, okay? Do not net out the loan forgiveness.
I think some churches opened up a separate checking account to pay the expenses, just so they could see that they had used it all. But
Okay.
Those expenses were still your normal operating expenses, and they need to be reported as you normally would if you paid them out of your regular checking account.
Yeah, definitely. All right. If you've got any questions that we didn't cover, I don't have anything else to share with you. So if you do have questions, we'd love to hear them. Usually, questions aren't usually too unique. It's interesting when they are, but there's a lot of similar questions out there.
So I've been taking the questions as they come through here.
Yep.
Let me see. Can you go back to the previous page, please?
That's a good one.
Okay, is that about the PPP? Julie has asked the question about, if it was just forgiven in early 2020, can you still consider it forgiven? And there's, I don't know if you guys have all been on or have gotten the most recent finance newsletter. In there, I have a link to a webinar from Wagner, who's our CPA firm. It's also on the finance section of our webpage. You can get to there. But they say that there's two ways that you can do it. You can wait and record it this year, or because you know that it was forgiven, you can go ahead and put it on the right place last year. So I think, considering that you just got it forgiven this week, that's close enough to the end of the year. You can go ahead and put it into last year. I think that's a better matching to when you had the expenses and when you had the change. So I would suggest putting it into 2020, as long as you have gotten forgiven or due before you submit the report on the 28th.
I like that answer. These are my big takeaways I hope that you're leaving with. If you've got any questions, that email address is on the side of Ezra. So if you don't capture it now, it is available after you've logged into Ezra. Individual church deadlines, we're moving it back a month, so there's an extra month there for you to get your data in. So I'm hoping that means less follow-up emails for me this year. If you're not sure of something and you haven't asked us a question, please enter a comment into Ezra. We look at those. The people at General Conference look at those comments also, so they're very helpful to all of us.
Okay, a couple more questions. Someone asked, who usually fills this out at your church?
At my church?
And well, who usually, in most churches, who usually fills this out? How involved are church pastors?
I would say, I'm just estimating based on like the emails and the sign-ins I see. I bet a third of them are pastors, a third of them are paid employees, and a third of them are volunteers. I get emails from all sorts, and a lot of times it's based on the size of the church.
Okay.
There's a church admin up north that has 6 different churches, and she enters it in for 6 different churches.
I remember her. We said she should get an award for filling out the most reports every year.
I agree.
We had the question, many churches have investments at the Wisconsin United Methodist Foundation, and they might get scheduled distributions from them. So this particular church gets 5% back from WOMF every January. Should that go on 52D, which is amount received from interest and dividends?
I would say so, yeah.
Okay.
Especially because that's like a regularly planned thing also, yeah.
Okay. The other question, can you submit how to do W-2s for pastors? That might be outside of the statistical report.
I don't know how to do it.
Okay. So Bev, you may need to contact me separately. We are getting a lot of questions about how to do the W-2s. And so if you have a specific question about that, you can send an email to me. We'll try to help you out with that. And so I had somebody else that as the pastor, she enters the information, but there are other people who gather the information. So you might decide who wants to go on and do it, but you might have to work with several other people to gather the attendance with the Sunday school or what's happening there. So you might have to gather information. As he said, it's kind of handy to print out a blank form, or even to print out one that has your prior year information on it. Is good too. And then
the blanks always have the prior year information, which is great.
Okay. Okay. And then you could send that out either via email or just give a copy to the other people in your organization that and ask them to get you back with their part.
Especially because of the different tables. Like you think about like that participation and membership might go to one person. I know it's usually our head of trustees that has to help us with table 2. So that's, yeah, we also talk about like the different people that need to help out with the different parts.
Okay. I think that we did record this webinar. If you want to go back and look at it, or if you want to forward it on to other people, we're going to put it on the finance section of the web page. If you haven't been there lately, I don't know if you can get to that, Don, and show them. Otherwise, if you're on the main page, you can go over to ministries and then financial.
I'm sorry, where am I going?
If you go to the main web page for the Wisconsin Annual Conference main web page. Okay, and over there under ministries on the right-hand side, if you go to finance and administration. So I try to keep this update section with some of the more recent things that you need to see. And we've got like the registration for the statistical report here, and we'll put a link to this webinar right in here as well. We might, and we'll also have available the slideshow that Don did so that you can have that available.
And if you really liked it, we're doing it again at 6 o'clock tonight. Same show.
For those of you, I'll just put out a point. If you'd still like to make any apportionment payment before this Friday, we are accepting 2020 apportionment payments through this Friday. If you do them online on Ministry Financial, you have to make sure that you put the date as 12/31/20 in the financial year 2020. Otherwise, it defaults to whatever the current day is. But if you want to flip between the years and see what your 2020 apportionment is versus 2021, you just have to change that date. In the newsletter that you can also get to from the page we were just at the very bottom of it, Jean Nicholas put information on how to do the W-2 on there. And so we'll always try to have a benefits corner now in the finance newsletter. Any other questions before we close out today? Did I hit everything? I think the one question that we had outstanding was just to confirm whether the Wisconsin United Methodist grants go on 54B or C.
Yeah.
And so we'll get out information to you about that. Anybody else have anything before we close? I think that's it. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you for what you do for your church. I know it's been a very tough year for everybody in a church. I think accountants and those people who handle the finances especially as well. So if we can help you out in some way, please send us an email or give us a call. Some are working from home, some are here at their desk, but if you call our number, it will go to us wherever we are.
Thank you very much. Very informative.
Good.
Glad to hear it.
All right. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
You too.
Thank you.
Bye.
Sarah, I'm impressed that was an hour.
That, I think that was great. I think that's exactly what we needed to do, and I thank you.
Yeah, no, I was happy with this. It's good. I
I think it worked out well. I moved all the questions over to the right side, so I had a big screen for that. And it's interesting if I didn't bring it up right away because I thought you had something later, then a couple
Yeah.
people would say, hey.
Hey, yeah, no, this was very helpful. Like, as someone who's been teaching online, like, yeah, it's tough doing the chat and thinking about other stuff. So it was very nice having you there. Actually, next semester I get a TA, and I said, I just want someone there with like the chat. Like, that's what I need.
It's hard to watch and to say, did I answer that? Did I? No, I know I'm going to get to that. Do I have to? Bev Donahue was one that said she could not log into Ezra and they did not use it last year.
Okay.
So going to find out who she was. Bev Donahue looks like she's
You want
with
to
Sparta.
stop recording now?
I did.
Okay, it still says recording.
Oh, I hit stop recording.
All
Okay.
right.